p.m. in Nairobi, 5:30 p.m. in Cape Town, 4:30 p.m. in Nigeria, and 10:30 a.m. in New York. Wherever in the world you are watching, welcome to our first episode of 90 Minutes Africa. My name is Rudolph Okonkwo, and my co-host is Chido Onoma. Chido, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Rudolph, and thank you, listeners.
So we are glad that you make our time to join us today. This is the beginning of what we hope will be a weekly show every Sunday. And for those of you who do not know, my name is Rudolph, and I've been a journalist in Nigeria and outside of Nigeria for many years. Chido, for those who do not know, Chido became famous for wearing a T-shirt called he wrote, "We All Biafrans." Chido, tell them a little bit. Introduce yourself to our audience.
Thank you very much. My name is Chido Onoma. I'm a Nigerian journalist. I'm reaching you from Vancouver, British Columbia this morning.
Now, tell them a little bit about our show. Our show is called 90 Minutes Africa, and the show is designed in such a way that we cover the whole of Africa. We want to engage people in conversations about things that are very important to all of us. And we are going to do this once a week. What is different? How is this show going to be different from all the other shows that we have online, on Clubhouse, on Space, and every other place that people watch things and listen to shows?
Well, this is a unique show at different levels because you have two people who between them have over 60 years of experience in journalism, both at the continental and global level. And we're going to bring in some of the best minds in different areas across the continent to engage with citizens and see how Nigerians, Africans interface with the rest of the world in a world that is constantly changing. So there are a lot of unique perspectives that we hope to bring to this show, and we hope that people can relate with it as effectively as possible.
Very good. Thank you so much, Chido. For today's show, can you briefly tell us our guest? We have a very important guest today.
Oh, we have a very important guest. We can't say that enough. It's the Professor Farooq Kperogi, who teaches new media and is a professor of communication in the United States of America. But beyond his teaching activities, he's an erudite public intellectual. He engages very well, and he's well versed. He understands the issue, and the way he relates with them and relates with his audience is extremely exciting. So we're happy to have him on today.
Also, I have to say that he's the only, I think, columnist that I know in Nigeria who writes a column and it becomes news piece. The next moment is out. But let me talk about the structure of the show. So we bring in a guest and we interview the guest and we talk to the guest, and after the interview session, we will have opportunity for people, our audience, to interact with the guests and all of us, and maybe bring up their own questions. And so we will give you when that time comes, we will give you the link to click if you want to join us in the studio and be part of the conversation. Also, we are going to be looking at the social media, the comments and everywhere, and see some of the questions you can pose there. We will also discuss it. So without wasting so much time, I think we want to bring in our guest who has been patiently waiting for us to do this small introduction, because this is the first time. And we would really want to thank you for being with us, for joining us. And we don't take you for granted that you are spending time, this precious time this weekend with us. So without much waste of time, let's bring in Professor Farooq Kperogi. All right.
Good morning.
Good morning. Welcome to the show.
It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks so much for that generous introduction. Although I don't recognize myself in that introduction because
No, we are sure we know what we're talking about because it's been a very interesting few years for all of us, watching Nigeria, especially towards this end of the government of Muhammadu Buhari. Uh,
yeah,
and if there is anybody, I think anybody writing or commenting on Nigeria that we can say has taken a lot of hits for what they write is you. So let's start this conversation with where are things today in Nigeria for you, as someone who has observed this government from the beginning to today, that we have about, I think they have about 15 or 14 months left. Where are things?
you mean in terms of the performance of the government?
Performance of the
Or
government, the stability of the country. They came in with
yeah,
the idea that they were going to change the country, to bring in
yeah.
change. What
hmm
happened?
Well, I would say at this point, frankly, there's a Buhari fatigue in the country, a disabling, debilitating Buhari fatigue. Everyone has come to terms with the fact that he has failed, has no capacity for reform or to retrace his steps. And I get this sense everyone just feels let's wait out the end of this regime. And so we see there's a psychological stalemate in the country right now. Governance has ceased, as everyone knows, because of the politics of succession. The cabal itself, the political operatives of the president have not even agreed on who is going to succeed the president. So there's all kinds of permutations going on, and the biggest casualty in all of that has been governance, has been concern for the welfare of the citizens. Insecurity is still pervading the country, and everyone seems to have given up. So there's what I would call a state of suspended animation right now in Nigeria at at all levels, at the level of the governed, because everyone has lost hope that Buhari can ever do anything better than what he has always done in the last 7 years. And the people at the upper reaches of power structure also know that there's nothing they can do. So everyone is waiting out until the regime expires and is replaced by something else. That's how I would characterize what's going on right now.
Hmm. Chido.
Yeah, thanks for that characterization and analysis. Then the question then would be what is to be done because these people obviously are out of touch with reality. If you look at the petrol situation in Nigeria, the insecurity and all of that, Nigerians, for how long can Nigerians wait out this? What are the prospects? Is there any light at the end of the tunnel, so to say? Going ahead, 2023, how, because there is a sense in which how you've characterized this regime, if care is not taken, they would bring this characterization to the new regime that will take over government. So it will be more like a third term of Buhari. What do we need to do to ensure we don't have this kind of situation?
I mean, yeah, that's a great question. And I would say one of the profoundest uh, characterizations of the Nigerian state that I've encountered came from Peter Obi, whom I hadn't been listening to previously, and I blame myself for it. And he said, the Nigerian state, the Nigerian nation itself, is like a car with a knocked engine, and that we think that we can change the driver. Periodically we change the driver of the car and hope that the car will move, but that the problem is not the driver of the car, it's the engine. So it's its own very metaphoric way of saying that we have a very deeply systemic and structural problem that would ensure that whoever succeeds Buhari cannot make success of governance. And People in big English capture that as restructuring. But there are people who are invested in the system, people who are benefiting from the system, people who are profiting from the deformed structure that Nigeria has, don't want to restructure it. They love the idea of changing the drivers periodically, who gives money to mechanics to fix problems that are not responsible for the car not moving. So, and they get money from that. They get a vulcanizer, they get a tire person, they get all kinds of things, but that's not really the problem. So, for me, the solution, to the several problems bedeviling the country is if you have a core of people who are invested enough in the present and future of Nigeria to realize that, look, we inherited a very deformed country from the colonialists. They did not intend for this country to work. That much is clear. The formation of the country, the structures that we inherited were not intended to be functional. So what, and we missed an opportunity from the very first core of people who succeeded colonialists to get together and say, look, these guys came here for exploitation, for exploration, and they got what they wanted. The pressure we put on them, the international pressures made colonialism passe, so they left. Now we are stuck with this structure they have bequeathed to us. How do we make it work? The divisions within the country that was an instrument of colonial rule to create and let people see each other as enemies, as antagonists. That was one of the structures, one of the strategies of colonialism. And they use that everywhere. So how do we get our people together? Can we have a nationalist history of Nigeria that people are taught? And we've learned from a lot of scholars that nationalism, it's about imagination. Even Anderson Benedict wrote a book, The Imagined Community. The nation is an imagined community. How do you nurture that imagination in people to see themselves as one? I live in the United States here, and I tell my students, you do not regard someone from Mexico as your compatriots, although you share boundaries with them. But you regard someone in Alaska, which is closer to Russia than it is to anywhere here, as your compatriots. You regard someone from Hawaii, which is closer to Japan than it is to anywhere in the United States, as a compatriot. How did that happen? Imagination, nurturing the imagination. So we don't have that. So let's have that. And I'm a serious advocate for tweaking our democratic experiment in ways that show sensitivity to our cultures, to our uniqueness, to our peculiarities. You cannot have a country where one demographic group permanently rules and then other demographic groups are perpetually disadvantaged. They don't feel a sense of belonging. Everyone should have some sense of belonging. And yeah, go ahead.
So we'll get to that question about sense of belonging, but I just wanted to take you a little further on where you talk about nationalist history. In your contribution to the book that I edited that came out last year, Remaking Nigeria, you talked about recreating Nigeria in this sense. I mean, short of a revolution that would bring about this upheaval and fundamental change, certain basic things like the name of the country, the flag of the country, and so on, so that people can also imagine and identify. Could you speak to that in relation to your responses in the last few minutes?
Okay. Yeah. So, and a part of the intellectual laziness that has been very fundamental to the structure of Nigeria, to its stalled progress, has been the fact that we have not been able to do anything to tweak even the simplest and littlest things in our nation. For instance, the name Nigeria is a colonial hangover, and it has several echoes of racism. And it's an exonym. That means the name that came from outside and applied to us. And there's no agreement among scholars about the etymology of Nigeria. Some people say it's from the Latin word for black, nigger, nigr, and all that. Some other scholars have said no, it's from the North African word for River Niger, Ingr, and whatever it is. But whether it's from Latin black or from the North African River Niger, it's not unique to us. It's not ours. Roma, I'm having a talk. Okay, let's go. When I'm done, I'll call you. Okay.
Well,
That's my 5-year-old. So she keeps me busy. So we do not. So that, and then of course the fact that it was named by the girlfriend of one of our colonial conquerors, should make it incumbent upon us to change that name. And interestingly, there was I forget the name of this guy. He was from the southeast, or eastern Nigeria, who suggested the name Songhai as a name to replace Nigeria because he recognized the fact that this was a colonial name. I was in the 1960s when several countries were changing their names to reflect, So we don't even have that. Our national flag is very flat, it's unimaginative. It shows a lot of creativity deficit. It was also handed to us by colonialists. The only two things we've been able to change were our currency and our national anthem. But other than that, it's been stalled. So for me, it's very representative of the intellectual laziness of the ruling elite that they cannot even do something that simple. And a very characteristic response for Nigerians about things like that, it would be like, is that going to cure insecurity? Is that going to bring food to the table? Is that going to resolve our problems? Why do we bother? Why do we major on minor things? And I call that non sequiturs. That's a very logically faulty argument. As I pointed out in my column on Saturday, some things are not means to an end. They are an end in themselves. No one ever argued that changing Nigeria's name is going to solve any other problem. No, it solved that problem of change of name itself. That's it, nothing more. And when Ghana was called Gold Coast, it had a lot of echoes of colonialism, as of slavery. And when they got their independence, they said, no, we cannot be stuck with this name that reminds us prominently of colonialism, of slave trade, and the names that were used. So we're going to change it to an empire, a pre-colonial African empire that was very glorious and illustrious. And they chose Ghana. And the Ghana Empire, as we all know, did not even reach to most of what is now Ghana. Most of it was in what's present-day Mali, and some parts, something was not even, maybe a little bit of northern Ghana was part of Ghana. I'm not even sure about that. There were so many other countries came together and said we cannot be stuck with a colonial name that permanently reminds us of our exploitation. And so, did it solve any other problem? No. The problem it was meant to solve was name, and that name was solved. So to think that changing the name is going to cure insecurity, is going to cause all these other changes, no, that's not the argument. So it's a straw man argument. You're making an argument that someone hasn't made and proceeding to demolish that argument as if it were a response to an argument. No one says that changing our name is going to solve any problem. No, it's not going to solve any problem. So people who cannot change their names, a very loaded colonial racist name, they cannot even do anything about their national flag, which has a lot of creativity deficit. It cannot, frankly, come together and reform the structure of the country and say, how can we get together? How can we give people a sense of belonging? What kind of economic system can we implement that ensures that there's development, that ensures that people who produce are not disadvantaged, and that does not encourage laziness, so that people who have resources to develop themselves don't just sit on their backs and wait for natural resources from elsewhere to fund their lifestyle, that sort of thing. We are not ready to have that kind of conversation because of a very deep intellectual laziness that exists among the ruling elites in Nigeria.
All right, Professor. Let me take you back to what you said before. It appears from what my reading of what you are saying that you agree with a lot of people in Nigeria that it doesn't matter who wins the election with this current structure we have, that we're not going anywhere, nothing will change. Now, can you talk about, because some people don't understand, who are these people resisting the change that is needed, the restructuring of Nigeria? Who are these people and why are they doing that? Can you shed light into that?
Well, I mean, that's for everyone to guess. I mean, first of all, it's very clear who they are. These are the people who are invested in the structure of the country itself. The usual suspect, the politicians, the perpetual contestants, people who get elected into political offices, who are appointed into political offices, who make money from the free petrol dollars that flow from Niger Delta and things like that. So these are people everyone knows them. You ask them to from every and they are pan-Nigerian in that sense. So they are invested in the and frankly, like an African American philosopher and journalist, I forget his name now, said, "Power does not give up. You have to challenge power. No one ever has access to power, to cheap resources, and then willingly give it up in the interest of the greater good. Human beings, there are very few people who are like that, but the vast majority of people will always protect the privileges that they enjoy. And so it takes other people pushing them or creating what I call the rhetoric of inevitability before they actually give up. But our problem in Nigeria is that I don't even see, in the early days when I was in university and even earlier, we could talk about, a pan-Nigerian coalition of progressive minds. And that's how I got to know people like Chido Onuma, right from his student union activist days, and the kinds of associations that I have had and the kinds of people that I admire were always people who understood themselves as human beings, first of all, before anything else. Or in the case of Nigeria, they see themselves as Nigerians first, and they see our differences as incidental to our humanity. The fact that you speak a different language from me or you worship a different God from me is incidental to your humanity. It doesn't define your humanity. And so you can relate to people on the basis of their humanity, things that connect you. That's a deeper level of connection. But we have gotten to a stage. So, when you have this core group of people who share that vision and come together and say, look, we have to fight for this nation. The trouble with Nigeria is that it hasn't died. And frankly, it probably won't die, but it won't survive either. And so it's perpetually in a twilight zone. And so when we realize that, we'll ask ourselves, are we going to be able to continue like this, to have a nation that is neither alive nor dead? And then, for how long are we going to continue on this stage? Because the more we stay together as a country, the more intertwined we become, and the more difficult a divorce becomes. Because every divorce is very emotionally traumatizing. My wife, for instance, Igbo, and then my children, my first wife was Yoruba. If we have a divorce, nationally, where are they going to go? They have relatives in all parts of Nigeria. Where are they going to go? So, and the more this is happening, the more we stay together as a country, the more, we are evolving. And I wrote an article about how Nigeria is evolving. Increasingly, I had two people visit me, one from the Southeast and the other from the Southwest. They are kids. And both of these people can't even relate. This young man, he's from, he shares the same hometown with Chinua Achebe. So when he told me his hometown, I asked him, what's the hometown? And it took him time to even think about the hometown. And when he mentioned it, I said, oh my God, Ogidi, that's Chinua Achebe's hometown. Do you know how important that hometown is? I said, he had no idea. So for him, he had no investment in the ethnic identity, in the Igbo ethnic identity. That didn't make any sense to him. And there was another Yoruba lady in something who was in her teens. She just couldn't also relate. They were more alike than unlike. And so we have you have a new crop of Nigerians emerging who don't have any affinities, any investments in the kinds of identities those of us grew up with. And it's going like that. So we are going to get to a stage where a divorce is even going to become completely impossible, like 2 generations from now. Yet, the structure we are bequeathing to those people is one that will ensure that they are permanently neither dead nor alive. They're always going to be in the twilight zone. So how do we ensure that that does not happen? Is to have, frankly, this coalition of people who understand that the way the nation is structured, it's evolving to a point where a divorce is even going to be impossible. So how do we make it work? If not for us, at least for the generations that come after us. And I hope we can gather that kind of we can have those kinds of people come together. Unfortunately, the political system we are running, that we call democracy, is so flawed, so deeply flawed, that I'm not even sure how that is going to happen. And I think our intellectual energy should be expended on trying to see how we can make that happen. Because the people who enjoy it will never let it happen. That much is clear. No one gives us power. No one gives up privileges willingly. That never happens anywhere in the world. But certain people have to create a force to confront them. And when the force is powerful enough, it's going to overpower them and something's going to happen. So I think our challenge now is not to elect people into power, but to have people who share this vision, who are sufficiently animated by the desire to get Nigeria to work, that they get people together to change the structure of Nigeria. It's not going to solve all the problems. It's never intended to solve all the problems because all the new problems are going to emerge. There's no question about that. But create a system where when new problems emerge, they can be solved. That's why America has amendments, to their constitution. The existence of amendment is an admission that the first document, the original document, was not perfect, and that's why there's constitutional amendment. It's an admission that the first one wasn't good enough, and it's always going to be in a state of permanent revision and review. But it has to start. In Nigeria, since 1960, we have not even started. And I think, I hope.
Yeah, thanks so much, Prof. And I'm happy some of these issues are coming up because there is this tendency when you talk or write about Nigeria, people tell you, oh, you're talking too much, you're writing too much, or is it grammar that is going to solve the problem? Correct me if I'm wrong. There is a sense in which I think we haven't intellectualized the problem of Nigeria enough. So at the start of the American Revolution, if you can also look at the French Revolution, when you say the American Revolution, you had the likes of Thomas Paine and so on, who put out philosophical and political works that tried to define or imagine the kind of country that they wanted to be. I mean, it wasn't the perfect country with all the crisis around slavery and all that, but at least from their own perspective, it was what they wanted and what they imagined. There is a sense in which that we haven't, public intellectuals, the depth of the analysis of the Nigerian crisis and the kind of solutions we prefer. So it's important, and I'm hoping that's part of the reason we created a platform like this, that we hope that we can not just tell truths to power, but do it in such a way that folks around the country understand, whether you are in the South or in the North. So speaking about that, I read your column yesterday. One of the things that struck me was the part that you mentioned, you were talking about the place of religion in the politics of the country. You said something profound that you noted that in the North, religion has been regionalized, and in the South, region has been religionized. And so that's one of the many problems. There are two parts of this question. One is the religious and one is the ethnic. I mean, you didn't talk about the ethnic thing, but I'm going to take you up on that.
Yes.
But I just want you to help our listeners understand what this means for the country and how, if possible, we can get out of this quagmire.
Yeah, so many things you mentioned. The first thing you said about the lack of intellectualization of Nigeria's problem, it's a profound statement, which even Chino Achebe made in his little book, The Trouble with Nigeria. In that book, he started off by saying even the so-called nationalists, the patriots who inherited Nigeria from the colonialists, he examined their thoughts in their profound. He's found them extremely shallow, very self-interested, and lacking in profundity. All of the major thinkers of the time, and he said something that he's I forget his characterization, but he said even the most casual thoughts of some other philosophers, some other nation builders, were more profound than the collected thoughts of these people who he mentioned names of those early nationalists. So it's a problem that the lack of intellectual rigor in confronting Nigerians' problem is a seminal problem. It's a problem that started from the very birth of Nigeria itself. So, but I think we need to go away from that. And there's a very anti-intellectual culture in Nigeria that when you want to intellectualize, you say, "Oh, too much grammar," things like that. So we really need to get away, get away from that. That's there's power in thinking and or what they call grammar.
All right.
The second. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, no, finish up. That's okay.
Okay, the second part of the question is, it's an enduring fact of the sociology of Nigeria that in the North, the dominant contradiction, to use Claude Ake's terminology, dominant contradiction in the North is religion. The dominant contradiction in the South is ethnicity. In the North, people define their identities in religious terms. So there are two Northerners. You have the Muslim Northerners and you have the Christian Northerners. The Christian Northerners call themselves Middle Belters. And what's his name? To give a very classic example, very dramatic example, Jerry Gana is from Niger State, but he's a Middle Belter. IDB, he's also from Niger State, but he's not a Middle Belter. He's a Northerner. That's just the way it is. So religion defines your identity in the North. In the South, that doesn't mean that ethnicity is not important, but it's not as important as religion. In the South, it's completely different. Ethnicity is more dominant in defining identities than religion is. And but frankly, there's a lot of not come. Where does that not come from? Is it from me?
No.
Someone is typing. It's not me.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So, Chido asked how we can resolve that. Frankly, for me, what I have evolved in my views about this. It used to be that we tried to run away from this and say it was false consciousness, that sort of thing. But what I have recognized is that people would rather die to protect their way of life than give up their way of life. And these primordial identities are very important to people. So my solution to this is to create mechanisms where people feel a sense of representation. If in the North, religion is the major contradiction, you should not create a system where people who are a symbolic minority in the North cannot ever aspire to any position of importance nationally or within their country. If ethnicity is so create a condition where you rotate power in such a way that everyone gets, and we already have these in many institutions. When people say it's not democratic, yes, it may not be democratic because there's no such thing as universally democratic. In the United States, the presidential election is not democratic. The state of Utah, with like 600,000 people, has 2 senators. And we are living in Atlanta. Atlanta is about 6 million people. Atlanta alone is several times the size of, not even talk of the whole of Georgia. But Georgia, we have 2 senators. Utah has 2 senators. The Electoral College gives equal weight to all the states of the country, however populated or underpopulated they are. But that's the way they design their own democracy. we can also create, because we have realized that we are driven by ethnicity and religion. Most people rather give up their life than give up their way of life. So how do we ensure that people, get a sense of belonging? Their self-esteem is nurtured and they feel that they matter in the country in spite of who they are. Is to create conditions. NANS, ASU, the Nigerian Labour Congress, even before anyone talked about this thing, they had always rotated offices from one region to the other. And these are the most progressive organizations you can think about. And they groomed people to succeed the next person until NANS, fell out and became the caricature that it is. But that's the way it has been. All these other organizations. ASU presidents, look at ASU president. Go to get a list of ASU presidents and see where they come from. And no one talks about. So we have to create a system where people get a sense of belonging and institute this nationally. That's the way that the primacy, the importance of these ethnic religious divisions are going to become less important when people feel that they are not disadvantaged by it or they are not overly advantaged by it. That in spite of who you are, and the other question people ask, we have more than 500 ethnic groups. How do you represent everybody? And I always say, in representational politics, you don't represent everybody. As I mentioned in that column, if Eladi Audu from Zuru in Kebbi State becomes president, for instance, someone from Southern Kaduna, someone from Adamawa, even Southern Borno will feel represented. It doesn't have to be every ethnic group, but there are symbols of representation I'm talking about. If somebody from someone from Okija, becomes president, it doesn't have to be, it gives a sense of belonging to not just people from that area, but almost everyone who speaks, including Delta Igbos, maybe even Ekwere, who historically say they are not Igbo. Even they get a sense of belonging. If a Benima becomes something, it gives, and that's what Goodluck Jonathan's presidency, gave a sense of belonging to so many southern minorities. And people say couldn't even build a borehole for his something. I say that's true, but that's a different conversation. His presidency, his rise to the presidency was not a means to an end. For me, it was an end in itself. It communicated for the first time that southern minorities, from whose region the wealth of the nation comes, can also produce a president. Whether he did poorly or well is not even a question at all, because people who preceded him also did poorly. So what's the big deal? So for me, in response to a question, one of the ways to manage these contradictions is to recognize them and ensure that everyone gets a sense of belonging. That's all. Then we can talk about competence and all that. That's a different conversation. Let's not match several unrelated things together.
All right. Thank you so much. I want to remind those that just joined us that you are watching 90 Minutes Africa. This is our first episode of the show, and our guest is Professor Farooq Kperogi. Now, we are going to also have an opportunity for our viewers to join this conversation. When that time comes, we are going to show you the link. You can join in and come to the studio and you can ask a question. We're also looking at some of the comments you're making on social media. So we're aware of that, and there will be that time for that conversation. But let's do another 5 minutes. We take a break, and when we come back, we will then get our viewers involved. But let me ask you, Prof, because you've been saying these things, and I want us to get to the what is actually happening now, which is that there will be an election next year, irrespective of what we think. And the leading candidates, I've been reading your columns. You seem not to be a fan of Bola Tinubu. You are not a fan of the vice president. So who is your ideal candidate? Who do you think should, despite the imperfections in the system, despite the fact that the constitution is not something that can carry the nation to anywhere, what do you think? Because people have to vote. People have to vote for somebody. Who? You don't have to mention name, but what kind of person do you think is the person that can maybe move that car to the point where they will be fixed, and somebody will fix it or something? Just go there.
Yeah. Is Chido talking? Okay, well.
Okay,
Yeah.
Chido, you're saying something. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm saying before Prof answers, I wanted to, there was a response he touched on, like maybe he could respond to that in addition to your questions. And just like religion, ethnicity is a major factor in the politics of the country. I would like to get your take on what you feel about the issue of power shifts and specifically the question of Igbo presidency. You touched on it in terms of representative politics and
Yeah.
so on. So maybe you could, in answering Rudolph's question, perhaps you could address that as well.
Okay, wow. So for me, and I always tell people, in spite of all the false claims that you brought Buhari to power as if everyone had any capacity to make anyone vote for anything other than whom they wanted. That I have no capacity to influence anyone to, but my ideal, because anyone who has read me will know this, that I'm really deeply emotionally invested in getting Nigeria to work. And that's because in spite of being in the United States, being a citizen here, I still, first of all, a Nigerian. That's the first country. That's the country of my birth. That's where a lot of my emotional investments are in. That's where my heart is. And when Nigeria works, it's going to feel not just Nigerians, but everybody else of African ancestry in the world with pride. And so I wanted to work. And so a lot of solutions that I suggest, they are transcendent. They are not limited by the immediate concerns of Nigeria. For me, one of the ways to get Nigeria to work is to make sure that everyone gets a sense of belonging. So, in response to that, who should be the next president of Nigeria? Number one, for age, I want someone who is relatively young. And the advantage of youth is that it's a powerhouse of creativity, and then it also suggests openness to ideas. It's not a guarantee, but someone who is in their 40s, 50s, maybe early 60s is more amenable to new ideas than someone who is in their 70s and maybe 80s. So there's that. I want someone who is young, who is energetic, who is amenable to new ideas. And then it's also good to have someone with international, with exposure, intellectual exposure, political exposure. Because although the presidency or the president is not supposed to know everything, but he should be smart enough to know the smart people, who can help him or her uh, with their project in nation building. And I also, being educated, and by education, I don't simply mean credentialing, because there are highly credentialed ignoramuses. It's not about credential, it's being educated and realizing, knowing enough to know what you don't know, because there are people who don't even know what they don't know, and that's a tragedy. But I also do not want the presidency to be a ping pong between this northwest and the southwest, because when that happens and people feel a sense of exclusion, it can animate frustration and a challenge to even the fundamentals of the nation itself. So in response to that, I would want the major political parties, or whoever it is that is responsible for this, to be sensitive to the regions and people that have been excluded since 1999. And so I'm in principle in support of the what is called power shift now, that power should move from one region to the other. And the North has been in power for the last 7 years. Um, the Southern minorities have had a chance to rule, which for me, although I was a great critic of Jonathan, I'm gratified by the fact that someone from there, got a chance to rule. So I support that. I would also support the ceding of power to the Southeast, because that's the region of the country that has never produced the president from 1999 until now. Not even a vice president, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, not even a vice president. So that's the part of the country that I think should produce the next president. Should the political parties recognize the wisdom of my suggestion, that would be gratifying, because when people talk about what animates alienation, when people feel alienated, when people feel excluded, they become susceptible to manipulations, that they are being all kinds of conspiracy theories and frustration and anger, and a call for the dismemberment of the nation, because it's like, if it doesn't work for me, and there's no chance it's going to work for me, why should I be invested in it? So the feelings that fuel calls for dismemberment are not entirely unreasonable, frankly, and they have to be confronted. And one of the ways to confront them is to recognize that, look, when people feel excluded and they don't see a way out of their exclusion, that they lash out. And when they lash out, it leads to all kinds of instability, upheavals, disabling upheavals. So for me, but of course, that's me being an outsider who is not a politician, who is not, vested in the system, who is not benefiting from the system. So it's going to be like you say, this big grammar, big book, and that it's about numbers. It's about what works. And then that goes back to what I said earlier, that the people who control the levers of power now in all the political parties now are people who are invested in a very deformed system, who benefit from it, who profit from it, and who do everything within their power to sustain it. But for those of us who are outside, whatever influence we can exert, we should, to ensure that this thing is equitable, that it moves around. Because frankly, I mentioned in my Saturday column that it's mostly, apart from the politics of symbolism, it's also a politics of access. And when someone from the way Nigeria has been structured now, which is defective, which is faulty, which I don't agree with, but people tend to have access to resources of the center when someone from their area occupies that place. That's what happens. So when you don't have anyone there from your area, you are permanently disadvantaged. And so if these advantages that come from being at the center rotate, then everyone will say, okay, well, even if I'm excluded now, there's a chance that when it's my turn, I'm going to be included. It's a very, you might say it's a very backward way to move a nation, but it's a recognition of how we are structured. And frankly, one of the things I have suggested in previous writing is that rotation should be instituted as part of the law, but it's going to get to a point where that becomes unnecessary. Because if you do that simultaneously with molding a national identity, and there's frankly, some of it doesn't even need to be done, doesn't need to be molded, because as I said earlier, Nigeria is evolving. And that evolution, a lot of us don't seem to be thinking about it. We're not conscious of it. We are really conscious of that evolution in collective identities. Collective identities are collapsing in ways that people don't recognize. Pidgin English, for instance, is becoming creolized. In linguistics, a creole is a pidgin language that becomes the first language of a people. In southern Nigeria, Pidgin English is being creolized, and the language is one of the most important constituents in the construction of our collective identities. So in the next 50 years, the difference between an Ijaw man and a Bini man,
President,
and an Equere man.
Putin may.
Sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry about that.
Okay.
Yeah, it's an error. Yeah, go ahead.
That difference is going to collapse increasingly because they're united by something more fundamental, which is language. Mm-hmm. And it's starting in the urban areas already, and it's going to seep through. So what I mean is that our identities themselves are evolving in ways that we are not recognizing at first, but that is going to happen. But so when that is going to get to a point where the difference between people, these ethnic differences, religious differences, will take a different form. It's not going to go away because societies are sustained by difference. That's the truth. Even Somalia, which is like the most monocultural society you can find on earth in Africa, they are 100% Muslim. Not just Muslims, they are also 100% Sunni. And not just that, they are not just the same ethnic group. They all descended from a common ancestor. In Somalia, they are different, but they created difference on the basis of clans. You belong to that clan, but their DNA shows that they are all from the same ancestor. That's the most monocultural society you can find on earth. But they have not had a central government since the early 1990s, fighting a civil war amongst themselves. As similar as they are, you can't get more similar than that. But they're still fighting. So difference is one of the fuels of society. But if it's managed well, you can proceed. Go ahead.
All right. So we're going to wrap up with it for the first segment, and when we come back, we talk about Ukraine and Nigerian situation with students from Africa stuck in Ukraine. Also, I would like you to address your friend the issue of Issa Pantami. He's an intellectual and maybe a professor to some people who is in government. So we have a lot of things to talk about more, and then we will get the audience involved in the conversation. So stand by, everybody. Just a few minutes break, 2-3 minutes.
A liar and a demagogue. But it is hypocritical for the United States to insist that we, as a nation, do not accept the principle of spheres of influence. For the last 200 years, our country has operated under the Monroe Doctrine, embracing the principle that as the dominant power in the Western Hemisphere, the United States has the right, according to the United States, to intervene against any country that might threaten our alleged interests. That's United States policy. And under this doctrine, the United States has undermined and overthrown at least a dozen countries throughout Latin America, Central America, and the Caribbean. As many might recall, in 1962, we came to the brink of nuclear war with the Soviet Union. Now, why was that? Why did we almost come to the brink of nuclear war with the Soviet Union? Well, we did that in response to the placement of Soviet missiles in Cuba, 90 miles from our shore. And the Kennedy administration saw that as an unacceptable threat to national security. We said it is unacceptable for a hostile country to have a significant military presence 90 miles away from our shore. And let us be clear, the Monroe Doctrine is not ancient history. As recently as 2018, Donald Trump's Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, called the Monroe Doctrine, quote, as relevant today as it was the day it was written, end quote. In 2019, former Trump National Security Advisor John Bolton declared, quote, the Monroe Doctrine is alive and well, end quote. To put it simply, even if Russia was not ruled by a corrupt, oligarchic, authoritarian leader like Vladimir Putin, Russia, like the United States, would still have an interest in the security policies of its neighbors. And I want people to think about this. Does anyone really believe that the United States would not have something to say if, for example, Mexico or Cuba or any country in Central or Latin America were to form a military alliance with the U.S. adversary? Do you think that members of Congress would stand up and say, well, you know, Mexico is an independent country. They have the right to do anything they want? I doubt that very much. Mr. President.
All right. Okay, welcome back. Welcome back, everybody, to our show. This is 90 Minutes Africa, and we are here chatting with Professor Farooq Kperogi. Segment, we are going to talk about what's happening in Ukraine, and also we touch on some other things that we miss because you know, when you have conversation about Africa and Nigeria, it goes so fast and so long, and time goes. So Chido, you can start with the Ukraine topic. Any question for Farooq? Oh, sorry, Chido is muted. Let me unmute him.
Yeah, thank you. So we don't have much time. We have about 35 minutes, and there's still a lot to cover. Does Prof want to talk on the Pantami thing before we then go to Ukraine, so we know we're done with Nigerian?
Get that out of the way. So, Professor, you're a friend of Pantami, and people have been wondering, why are you the lead critic of his what you call the fraudulent professorship? What's going on there? What's the significance of this? What is the bigger meaning of this?
Yeah, because it's an unprecedented abuse of political power that was going to go unchallenged. And so, as I've written a heck of a lot of things on that. Number one, so forget the question that he's not qualified. He hasn't published enough and hasn't risen through the ladder to the point where he should be a professor. But that's not even relevant because I'm going to leave that to the internal politics of the university. But for me, the greatest tragedy in that appointment or promotion was that he used the power of his office, the political influence of his office, to intimidate the vice chancellor and the governing council into giving him an unmerited professorship while he's a serving government minister. And as I said earlier, if he resigns today, or if he had resigned and accepted a professorship at Futo without even being qualified for it, I frankly wouldn't say a word. I wouldn't say a thing, because there are many people who have become professors without even deserving of that. And this is consistent with also my advocacy against intellectual fraud. It's not the first time. In 2011, I was the first person to expose or at least bring to public attention in the Onyeku Okere case, professorial fraud as well. You know, it turned out that she did not earn a PhD from Columbia University, in New York, NYU, the New York University, as she claimed. She did not work at the New York Stock Exchange. You know, she's a complete fraud who deceived the nation into appointing her as the DG of the Nigerian Stock Exchange. And I brought this out to public attention. She was also made professor by the University of Nigeria in Nsukka. I wrote about it and said, and at the time called it an unprecedented abuse of political power. At the time I wrote it, people who are supporters, as usual, said that was because she was an Igbo lady and I was a Northern Muslim. That's why I was bringing down Igbo people. When I called out Emagwali's false claims to have invented the internet and all these other wild claims, it was the same thing. What's interesting is that the people who praised me for it are the ones who are against me now for doing a similar thing to Pantami. So, but the principle for me, it's about principles, and they're consistent. It doesn't matter who is involved. It doesn't matter what my relationship with you is. And so what really brought me into this was First of all, when I read this, I was like, seriously? Is this happening? I even thought it was fake news. Then I saw the ad that he inspired the Zamfara State governor to put out in the Daily Trust, which include a lot of lies. The Zamfara State governor is not even educated enough to know the politics of the academy, to the politics of university, and his titular title, I mean, politics and all of that. So when I read that advertorial, I knew that Pantami wrote it himself and gave it to him to sign. So, I mean, with lies, he has 150 publications, which is a lie because, I mean, so apparently he's regarding even his public speeches as publications. And so someone who is not even literate enough to know that your publications, your speeches, and what do you call it, conference papers and position papers are not academic qualification, should even be a professor. But that's even out of the question. But he applied for an ad to be a professor of cybersecurity at Futo, but this entire appointment took place in 3 months, which is the fastest that anyone has ever been promoted to any position in any Nigerian university. So it's clearly an abuse of power. And he had bribed the media. He has a lot of money to silence the media, columnists, and everyone. And so he was going to get away with it. And I said to myself, what's the point of living if you can't tell the truth? Just because you have a relationship with someone? No. So that's what led me to, come out. Because if I hadn't talked about it, it would have gone under the radar. And then it becomes a standard that other people can use. The doctoral degree has been bastardized. Anyone can come up, just give money to someone, say, make me an honorary PhD, or all kinds of something. Now they're taking it to the professorial. That's the most prized title, in academia. So he just wants a title. He's tired of being called a doctor. He wants to be a professor. They say, hey, what do I do? Let me look for some university that I can intimidate or give money.
A market where I can buy one.
Exactly, a market where I can buy one. So he did that, and he was going to go with it. And I'm like, no, that cannot happen. I'm not going to be able to live with myself. So for me, it was my conscience pricking me and telling me to be consistent. And it's that consistency, as I've told you, I have done that consistently, going back to several years. I have and it's archived in the website of Daily Trust, my own blog, and everywhere else that I have published, have consistently called out fraud, intellectual fraud. And there's no reason why it should be different because I have some familiarity with Pantami. So that's basically the issue. It's a brazen form of intellectual fraud, political corruption that should not be allowed to go unchallenged.
Thank you very much, Prof. So we'll just quickly look at the situation in Ukraine before we bring in the audience. I'm sure they're itching to ask questions. So what's your take generally in a minute about Ukraine? Then we'll talk
Yeah.
specifics.
Okay. Well, first of all, it's that I wrote an update that I didn't think was going to resonate with a lot of people, where I said, look, you don't have to talk about everything. Ukraine's problem is Ukraine's problem. I don't know anything about it. I'm not interested in saying anything about it. But for me, it's basically this: there's no right or wrong opinion about it. How you think about it depends on where you stand. And from the perspective of, I generally, as a principle, support the underdogs against the top dogs. And Russia is an aggressor. Ukraine is an independent country that is making choices that its people and its leadership think are good for it. And Russia thinks that's not acceptable and invaded it. And also, as a pacifist, and when I see blood and bloodshed and something, I generally tend to recoil. And so I would never support any country invading another country, for any reason. And that's not just Russia, it's also the United States, it's also Israel. when the United States helped in the overthrow of Libya, Gaddafi, I condemned it. I did not like it. That's a big bully, uh, uh, trampling on a smaller country, less powerful country. It's the same principle. But at the same time, uh, I'm also troubled by the way it's being reported in the Western media. This Manichaean binaries, this the good, innocent Ukraine being trampled upon by the big bad Russia and nothing else. So, I mean, it's consistent with media reporting. That's the way. That's the philosophy of Western journalism, is to create a narrative of Manichaean binaries, of dualism, where it's evil and good fighting. That grips people's attention. It's about economics and nothing else. It's not about morality. People love stories of dualities, of evil and good. But when you look at it, you find, I mean, it's not that simple. But simplistic sound bites, the things that animate public broadcasting or broadcasting in general. So, I understand Russia's anxieties about Ukraine joining NATO and Western alliances because they share immediate boundaries and the consequences that's going to have on their own sovereignty and their peace and stability. That I recognize, but I would never, under any circumstance, defend violence to resolve any problem because hundreds of people, thousands are dying or displaced, and so my attitude to it is that it's all around
Yeah.
bad.
All right. Thank you so much. One of the things, personally, I think could be a takeaway from this is perhaps the need to create functional international institutions that can rein in nations so that whether it's America, whether it's Russia, whether it's Israel, we have a minimum standard that countries have. We hope we'll get there. But to the specifics, you talked about binaries and
Yes,
between the way the Western media is reporting this about good and evil. It's like in the evil reportage, Africans somehow have found themselves being dragged on there. So
absolutely.
we,
So,
we, we are the receiving end, and this war, why the rest of the world should care is that this war is about blue-eyed white people, not about Arabs or poverty-stricken African countries.
yes,
So looking at that, then looking at all we've said about our country, maybe quickly before we bring in the audience, then there is this issue of Nigerians wishing to go and fight or and ultimately die to defend Iraq. How do you wrap your head around all of this? First, the media depiction of this fight and why the rest of the world should rise in
yeah,
defense of Ukraine, and then at the other end, how bad our society, and I mean Nigeria, has become that people are then willing to go and die in a
yeah.
war thousands of kilometers away.
That's true. So the first thing is the idea that, and that's there's a great guy. He's white American, but very conscientious, who did his uh, compilation of sound bites from TV stations where the broadcasters, the reporters, and the pundits were invited on on shows were basically saying, "I can't believe this. These refugees are not some brown people from the Middle East or Africa. These are white people, blue eyes and blonde hair. So the idea that we should pay attention to this, give a disproportionate attention to what's happening in Ukraine because it involves blue eyes and blonde hair and white skinned people, is just, I mean, a lot of it is unconscious bias, it's unconscious prejudice, but it's frankly one of the reasons that I decided that I'm not going to bother with this, because there are no more people dying in Ukraine than there are in Nigeria or in Palestine or elsewhere in the world. But of course, we know the power of Western media is dominant, and whatever it does, captures the imagination of the entire world. But the second concern, frankly, for me, is the way Africans in the Ukraine are being treated. They are being treated as subhumans. A lot of them are being turned back from the borders. They are not allowed to hop on cars and trains to escape. The Ukrainians are prioritizing uh, people with white skin. And, frankly, this is consistent with this. There's a study conducted by Harvard about unconscious racial prejudice, and that in Europe, and it shows that in that part in Eastern Europe is extremely negrophobic. Negrophobic meaning they have very deep unconscious bias against black skin, against dark skin. So there's a for them they associate dark skin with a lot of negativity. It's way less in Western Europe than it is in Eastern Europe. So it's a color coded uh, uh, gradation of prejudice against black people. And so red indicates really deep negativity, and then green shows positive association. Both Russia and Ukraine are deep red. These people have very negative, it's instinctual negative association with blackness and negativity. So I wasn't surprised that that's happening. And it's interesting that some Nigerians have become so frustrated with Nigeria that they're prepared to go and fight. And as I pointed out with someone yesterday, or discussing this, they are paying, and they have been asked to pay to go there. So they have been asked to pay to go and commit suicide, because it's certain that both Russian forces and Ukrainian forces will shoot at them because they associate negativity with dark skin. And so for me, the realization that we are being treated as subhumans, by even the Ukrainians that a lot of us identify with instinctively because they are the smaller party in this something, just frankly, just made me not care that much. I mean, on a human level, I care because these are human beings, women, children, men dying needlessly, in my opinion. But I know that if this war were to be in Africa, no one would care. No one would even cover it at all. That's the fear that I have. I so on a very on a human level, I simultaneously sympathize with the plight of the Ukrainians, but I also am concerned that Africans, even in the Ukrainians in their worst moments, cannot help being racist toward Black people. That really concerns me.
All right, thank you so much, Prof. Let's go to our audience. There we have two people who joined us now. Please, if you come on, just say your name, where you are, and what comments or question you have. Try to limit it to 30 seconds so that we can get more people involved. There were people who were trying to join in. So, Chris, you are next. Go ahead.
Okay, my name is Chris Oluka. I'm actually calling from Gombe, Northeast Nigeria.
Okay.
Based on what Prof Kperogi has just said about the European being skeptical and fearful of the black skin and all that, wouldn't you, especially coming from the experiences of our people in Ukraine? For me, basically, I think the main problem is back home here.
All right,
it is a failure of the government. Yeah. For me, basically, if the country, if Nigeria and indeed Africa as a whole should do what they are supposed to do, the government of these nations in Africa, I wouldn't think there will be any need for people to run to some of these countries that ordinarily we are supposed to be better than. Who is Ukraine? Which country? I mean, ordinarily, we shouldn't have been going to Ukraine, for example, to seek for greener pastures or for, educational opportunities, if not for the failure of our people here. So I think the onus should be on government, and we should take that blame, the responsibility, of what our people are suffering there in Europe. That's all I want to say. And it's a very well-known problem that we should look inwards. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Chris. Let's get in Sam. He's been trying to come in, and maybe after that we can take the prof's answers or comments on those things. Sam, you are next. Are you there, Sam?
You seem to be having connection issues.
Okay. All right. So you can address the issue with what Chris raised.
Yeah. So it was basically a comment, and I agree with him that it signalizes the depth of hopelessness that the people feel, that they would even want to go and commit suicide and pay for it. When people have nothing to lose, that's one of the worst psychological situations any government would want to get their people through, to get them to a point where they feel that they have nothing to lose. And when people have nothing to lose, they are very dangerous. They are suicidal. And I see the interest that a few Nigerians, I think the last time I read was at least 200 Nigerians. I see those people as suicidal, but they are not suicidal in the traditional conception of suicide. These are suicidal thoughts that are wrapped in existential torments. These people are tormented existentially. They do not see a way out. They are frustrated. They are in despair. They don't see any hope. And there's nothing to live for in Nigeria. I also read the story of a Nigerian who said he would not relocate to Nigeria under any circumstance. He would rather die there because he had graduated and was jobless for 5 years before he found his way to Ukraine, and said he would not be part of the repatriation of Nigerians from Ukraine to Nigeria, because he said, if I go there, what am I going to do? I'm going to be back to square one. I'm just going to hope against hope that this war will end and that we're going to continue. But if it doesn't, well, I'd rather die here. So that guy's experience, and the people who want to go there in spite of the knowledge that they could get killed, they could get murdered, all represent the depth of frustration that Nigerians feel. And that's a terrible thing for any nation to have.
All right. Chido, what do you have to say? Do you have any comment?
Well, I'm just going to add that people can add their questions in the chat comment section if they are not able to join the room while we take other people. So while we wait for participants to...
Chris, thank you so much. I have to let you go so that other people can find space to come in, okay?
Yeah, that's okay. No problem. Right. Thank you so much to all of you.
All right.
For these years.
Okay.
Yeah. So just talking about following up with what Chris said, I don't know, Prof, your take in terms of the government's own response to the issue. We've seen videos of what the Indian government, for example, how they treated their own returnees and all of that. Perhaps you have something to say about the way Nigerians. I'm not sure. There was a comment I saw on Facebook. I've yet to authenticate it about the Minister of Foreign Affairs saying Nigerians who are there as on their own, in the sense that they are private citizens. I don't know what you've heard from your sources.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to me that that's accurate, because I have read of the government allocating how many million?
About $8 something million.
Yes, to And I've seen stories of Nigerians who have been brought back to the country. So it appears that it's real, that they are bringing people, but that they invested money to get people out of that place to Nigeria. So in that way, I mean, if it's true, then it's worthy of praise. Of course, there are people who raise the question, ask the questions, how the money is going to be utilized. You know, Nigeria being Nigeria, and the fact there are certain people who don't want to return. So what's going to happen to the money? And I think the allocation is based on an analysis of how many people need to be
brought
brought
back.
back to Nigeria. And then, but of course, we now know that certain people have chosen to not come back. And then there are people who have come back on their own because they are kids of rich parents. So there are questions that have been asked on accountability and transparency. But I mean, for me, it's the one thing that I think it's worthy of praise. You know, the government that they have initially after their lackluster response, and I think in response to a lot of criticism, they decided, hey, let's help these guys come back. So I
Yeah.
think it's praiseworthy if what I'm reading is correct.
Okay.
Uh, and that kind of contradicts what the quotes that have been trending on social media that the government says, hey, they are on their own. I don't, even if they say that, it appears they have reversed it or that they didn't say it in the first place and someone just made it up.
Okay, there is a sense in which the crisis that Nigerians are facing in Ukraine resonates back home because a lot of the, if I'm not mistaken, a lot of the people in Ukraine are students
Yes.
who ordinarily ought not to have left Nigeria if we had a functional system in terms of education. So, as an academic, even though you're not part of that system, I'm sure you relate with it somehow.
Yes.
And I also saw your take on the delegation of NANS to ASU. How do you relate these two developments?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the public universities in Nigeria, you know, is about to collapse, and the only people who have kept it going, as even though it's not it's not optimal, but the people giving it some semblance of life, the ASU people. Many of us don't like them. I mean, a lot of people don't like them because of the strikes, and they say they should have
I
devised.
just hold on, Prof. I just read a comment here, which perhaps I should read out to you and in your analysis. So it's saying it's heartbreaking that Nigerian government is spending millions of dollars to evacuate Nigerians who are basically students from Ukraine. Why they cannot spend such amount on the education system in Nigeria? Go ahead, please.
Yeah, that's the so the and you know it's a singularly irresponsible act that the government has made. I had hoped that they would resolve this ASU strike, uh, but what they basically did was to say, "Hey, you have scored the goal." In 2009, they reached an agreement which government signed. And once the government here, it doesn't matter who changes, who is in charge. It's the government. And then they renegotiated this agreement in 2010, 2020. And then suddenly the government is now saying that they don't have enough money to implement the same agreement that they signed and are going to reconstitute another committee to renegotiate the terms of the agreement that they had willingly signed. And I think, and I call that criminal idiocy. That's a singularly irresponsible thing to do. Now, uh, they say they don't have money. I mean, it's about priorities. If they prioritize public education, there's money for it because they're spending money in other things that a lot of us think are not important. You know, the amount of money they're spending on this re-election, on they're even donating money. Someone's talked about. I read about the Nigerian government donating $1 million to Afghanistan. Um, of course, I've heard the alternative argument that, well, the other countries who give us aid also have other problems, domestic problems that they haven't resolved. yet they're giving aid to African countries, including us, and therefore that it's not right to insist that because Nigeria hasn't resolved all its domestic problems, it cannot have obligations to the international community. That's a valid argument, but there is there's a clear and present danger of the collapse of Nigerian public university system. This is the surest, this is the surest social ladder to get out of the circle of poverty. We all know that if you have a chance to get university education, all of us here, three of us here, we are beneficiaries of Nigerian public universities. We have been able to do for ourselves what we have because of that chance we have had. It provided that social ladder to climb. And so one of the surest ways to get people out of poverty is to give them a university education. And a lot of our young people are very creative. The chance to study in universities gives them an opportunity to mold, to nurture, and cultivate their minds and discover new skills that they can use to help themselves and their families. So to get these young kids to put their futures on hold perpetually, all the time, periodically, it's just so distressing. And so it's a priority that governments, if they were responsible, should make happen. But of course, you know why? Because a lot of them have their kids abroad for undergraduate education. If they're not abroad, they are in private universities in Nigeria. So they are not affected. And these are very self-interested people. If it doesn't affect them personally, they don't care. And so it really gets to me. There's a temptation to say ASU should just call up a strike or look for alternative means of agitating. And I have said that in the past myself, but I'm being truthful to myself. What are the alternatives to strike for an irresponsible, insouciant government like the Nigerian federal government? None. Protests will be infiltrated by government agents, and then they'll use that as a justification to ban ASU. Is it lobbying? In Nigeria, you don't lobby with on empty hands. You have to bribe the National Assembly members to pass. But even if they do, the National Assembly members are subservient to the president. If he says, or the executive, if they say, no, we're not doing anything, that's it. It stops. I can't think of any other thing that they can do.
Now, you sound so like we're hopeless. What do you think then about the people who say that we are rounding up now because we are almost 3 minutes to the end of the program? The people who say, looking at this situation, everything we discussed now for the past hour and a half, that it's a hopeless situation. That maybe the option is to say, let's everybody go their own way. Maybe they will be able to survive, and instead of all of us collapsing at the same time. What is your take on that?
Well, that's what I call disabling pessimism. And I come from an intellectual tradition that does not give in to disabling pessimism. The idea that nothing can be done, it's all bad, it's all collapse. Let no one try. All societies, all progressive societies in the world, have progressed or have gotten to where they are because they've resisted the temptations of disabling pessimism. So I don't think it's a very hopeless situation, but it's not enough reason to give up. I think we should keep trying. We should keep fighting. And it's the reason some of us, activists, write on social media, reach out to people that we have connections to who can help. A lot of times people tell me, why do you even bother? It doesn't seem like Nigeria is going to work. You're not even in Nigeria. You are somewhere else. You are a citizen of another country, and you can afford to not even talk about Nigeria again and still, but why do you bother? And I say, it's because that's where my heart is. And it's also because I know that giving up is not an option because Nigeria, most of my relatives are still in Nigeria, and I hope to go back to Nigeria at some point, whatever it is. And giving up is all that these guys, these vultures of power, that's what they're looking for. They want you to give up. And we are not going to give up. We're going to keep fighting. However hopeless it might seem, I think it's going to work out in the end. But we cannot do that by giving up. We cannot give up. We have to fight.
All right. Thank you so much, Professor Farooq Kperogi, which was a wonderful 1.5 hours with you. and we hope that in the future when we call you, you will come back and join us.
Absolutely. Who am I to refuse?
Thank you so much, Prof. It's a great pleasure having you.
Yeah, same here. Take care.
Thank you. For those who joined us, we thank you, and we hope you join us again next week at the same time. Next week, we're going to bring you another very, very interesting guest. So keep watching, and also go and subscribe to our social media, which is on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Look for 90 Minutes Africa and subscribe so that you can get all the information about the program. You can also, of course, follow Chido on his personal social media handle, or follow me on my personal social media handle. Once again, thank you for joining us, and we hope to do this again next week. For those who are trying to join us, I'm sorry, we run out of time and it's over. Once it's 19 minutes, there's something we can do. We have to go. That's our contract. But thank you.
Is there a recording? Is there a recording of the program?
Yeah, it is. It's on YouTube. It's on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and everywhere. So
is it archived for people who want to see it?
Yeah. If you want to watch it, you can go to YouTube. You see it. It's there. Thank you so much for joining us. We do this again next week.
Thank you, guys. See you next week.
Okay, bye.
Bye.